Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history of Elkhorn County, West Virginia. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. The year was 1907. West Virginia had been a state for just over 40 years, and the hills of Elkhorn County held secrets as old as the mountains themselves. Among the most disturbing was the case of Martha Pennington, a woman whose name appears in county records, newspaper clippings, and whispered conversations for decades after her disappearance. What makes this case particularly unsettling is not what was found, but rather what wasn't, and the questions that have remained unanswered to this day. Martha lived in a white two-story house on the outskirts of Millbrook, a small mining town nestled in the Appalachian foothills. The house still stands today, though no one has lived there since 1953, when the last owner departed in the middle of the night, leaving behind most of their belongings. Local residents avoid the property, though few can articulate exactly why. The house sits at the end of a long gravel drive, partially hidden by ancient oak trees whose branches seem to reach for the structure like gnarled fingers. The once pristine white paint has long since peeled away, revealing gray, weathered wood beneath. The windows, those that aren't boarded up, reflect no light, only darkness. According to county records, Martha was 27 years old in 1907, the only daughter of coal mine owner Edmund Pennington. After her mother's passing from tuberculosis in 1899, Martha had taken over the running of the household. The Pennington family had been influential in Elkhorn County since the 1870s, when Edmund's father first purchased land in the area and discovered rich coal seams beneath the rolling hills. By 1907, Edmund controlled 3 productive mines and employed nearly 200 men from Millbrook and the surrounding communities. Those who knew Martha described her as reserved but pleasant, meticulous in her habits, and possessing an unusual intensity. The local doctor, Henry Stillwell, noted in his personal journal that Martha often complained of headaches and had difficulty sleeping, though he found no physical cause for her ailments. Miss Pennington displays symptoms consistent with nervous exhaustion, Stillwell wrote in February 1907, yet I suspect her difficulties stem from something beyond mere physical distress. There is a watchfulness about her, a wariness that suggests some deeper concern. Martha kept to herself for the most part, though she was active in the local literary society and occasionally taught piano to young ladies from prominent families. A photograph from 1906, taken at a Millbrook Founders' Day celebration, shows Martha standing somewhat apart from the crowd, a tall, slender woman with dark hair pulled back severely from a pale face. Her expression is difficult to read, neither smiling nor frowning, but watchful, observant. Martha's father was frequently away on business, leaving her alone in the large house, with only the twice-weekly visits from Sarah Connor, a woman from town who helped with cleaning and cooking. The house itself was imposing, 3 stories, including the attic space, with 12 rooms, ornate woodwork, and a deep cellar for storage. It sat on 15 acres of land that backed up against the densely wooded hillside where the Pennington North Mine had its main entrance. It was Sarah Connor who first noticed that something was wrong when she arrived at the Pennington house on Tuesday, March 12, 1907, and found the front door unlocked, but no sign of Martha. Sarah later told investigators that she had called out upon entering, but received no answer. Thinking that Martha might be in the garden or perhaps had walked into town, Sarah began her usual cleaning routine. It was only when she went upstairs to change the bed linens and found Martha's bed had been slept in, but her outdoor coat and boots remained in their places, that Sarah became concerned. What happened next has been pieced together from police reports, newspaper accounts, and personal diaries of those involved in the subsequent investigation. The facts, as they were understood at the time, painted one picture. The truth, as fragments of evidence would later suggest, revealed something far more disturbing. The initial search of the house revealed nothing unusual beyond Martha's unexplained absence. Her bed had been slept in. Her clothing seemed undisturbed in the wardrobe. A half-finished cup of tea sat on the kitchen table, cold to the touch. No signs of struggle or forced entry were apparent throughout the large house. The only unusual detail was that the back door was unlocked, which Sarah Connor insisted was out of character for the cautious Martha, who was known to be meticulous about securing the house, particularly when alone. Miss Pennington was most particular about the doors and windows, Sarah told Sheriff William Blackwood. Every night she would check each one personally before retiring. I've never known her to leave a door unlatched, especially the back entrance. Sheriff Blackwood, who had served Elkhorn County for 15 years, initially suspected that Martha had simply gone for a walk and would return shortly. But as hours turned to days, concern grew. Edmund Pennington returned from his business trip to Pittsburgh and offered a substantial reward of $500, an enormous sum in 1907, for information about his daughter's whereabouts. The case was featured prominently in the Millbrook Gazette, with the headline, "Local Woman Vanishes Without a Trace," appearing on March 14, 1907. The newspaper described Martha as a respected member of the community and a lady of impeccable character. It noted that her disappearance had cast a pall of unease over Millbrook, and quoted Edmund Pennington as being devastated by this unfathomable occurrence and desperate for any information regarding his beloved daughter's whereabouts. Searches were organized, with miners from Pennington's operations combing the surrounding woods and hillsides. Dogs were brought in from Charleston, but failed to pick up any trail beyond the back garden. It was as if Martha had simply evaporated from existence. The lack of physical evidence puzzled investigators. No personal belongings appeared to be missing. Her coat still hung by the door, her boots remained in their usual place, and her purse sat on the dresser with her identification and what little money she carried still inside. The disappearance of Miss Pennington presents a most unusual case, Sheriff Blackwood told the Millbrook Gazette on March 16th. In my experience, when a person vanishes, there is typically some indication of their intentions, packed belongings, missing valuables, a note of explanation. Here, we have none of these things. It is as if the lady walked out of her life with nothing but the clothes on her back. The Millbrook Gazette reported that Miss Pennington's disappearance has baffled authorities completely. Sheriff Blackwood admits that in his 15 years of law enforcement, he has never encountered a case so utterly devoid of clues. Edmund Pennington's initial response was described as appropriately distraught, though some observers noted that his concern seemed to focus more on how the disappearance might affect his business dealings than on his daughter's welfare. Harold Watts, editor of the Gazette and longtime resident of Millbrook, wrote in his private journal on March 17th, "Watched E. Pennington at the town meeting today. His public display of grief seems rehearsed, lacking the raw emotion one would expect from a father whose only child has vanished. I have known Edmund for 20 years and have never seen him shed a tear, not even when his wife passed. There is something theatrical about his current distress." What made the case particularly strange was the complete absence of witnesses. No one reported seeing Martha in the days before her disappearance. The last confirmed sighting was by the local postmaster, Harold Jenkins, who delivered a letter to her on the afternoon of March 10th. Jenkins later told investigators that Martha seemed agitated when receiving the letter, but declined to elaborate further. When pressed about the sender of the letter, Jenkins became evasive, claiming that he didn't take particular notice, despite his usual habit of observing all details of his daily deliveries. Jenkins's reluctance to discuss the matter fully raised suspicions, but Sheriff Blackwood, who had known Jenkins for decades, chose not to press the issue initially. "Some men are simply uncomfortable being involved in police matters," he noted in his official report. Yet in his personal journal, Blackwood wrote, "Jenkins knows more than he's saying. The question is why he's holding back." The letter itself was never found. This would become one of many unsettling gaps in the case. As days passed without any sign of Martha, the investigation began to explore other possibilities. Martha's personal papers were examined more thoroughly. According to Sheriff Blackwood's notes, they found her diary, but strangely, all entries stopped abruptly on February 27th, nearly 2 weeks before her disappearance. The final entry read only, "The sounds have returned. Father says it's nothing but the house settling." This cryptic statement might have been dismissed, except that it wasn't the first mention of sounds in Martha's writings. Throughout the preceding months, she made occasional references to strange noises, scratching in the walls, and footsteps when no one is there. Dr. Stillwell, when consulted, suggested that these might be manifestations of Martha's nervousness, perhaps brought on by prolonged solitude. It is not uncommon for individuals living alone, particularly in large old houses, to attribute natural sounds to more sinister causes, Stillwell told the sheriff. The human mind seeks patterns and explanations, even where none exist. Edmund Pennington dismissed these concerns entirely. "The house is old," he told the sheriff. "Old houses make sounds. Martha always did have an overactive imagination." But something about the case troubled Sheriff Blackwood deeply. In his personal notes, recovered decades later, he wrote, "I cannot shake the feeling that Mr. Pennington knows more than he's telling. His concern seems genuine enough, but there's something in his eyes when we discuss certain aspects of the case, a wariness, perhaps even fear." Today I inquired about the mining tunnels that run beneath parts of his property, and he became visibly agitated, insisting that all shafts had been properly sealed years ago, and that there was no possibility of Martha having encountered any danger from that quarter. His vehemence seemed disproportionate to my simple question. The sheriff's suspicions were further aroused when he learned from the local bank manager that Edmund Pennington had made an unusually large withdrawal. $500, a considerable sum in 1907, just 1 day before Martha's disappearance. When questioned about this transaction, Pennington explained that he needed the cash for business dealings in Pittsburgh, yet bank records showed that he had also withdrawn a similar amount in Pittsburgh itself just 3 days later. "I find myself questioning whether Pennington was truly in Pittsburgh when he claimed to be," Blackwood wrote. "The train schedules would have permitted him to return to Millbrook unobserved if he departed late evening and returned on the early morning freight. I have asked the station masters at both ends to check their records, but I hold little hope that they will have noted his presence or absence specifically." The sheriff also noted that Edmund Pennington had been unusually insistent on directing the search efforts away from certain areas of his property, particularly the old mining entrances that dotted the hillside behind the house. "He claims the tunnels are unstable and dangerous," Blackwood wrote, "which may well be true, but his anxiety seems excessive. When I suggested bringing in experienced miners to explore these areas safely, he became quite agitated." As March turned to April, the investigation continued, but with diminishing intensity. Without new evidence or leads, it became increasingly difficult to justify the allocation of resources to the case. The daily searches of the surrounding countryside were reduced, then discontinued entirely. Newspaper coverage dwindled from front-page articles to brief mentions on the inside pages. Martha Pennington was fading from public consciousness, becoming just another mystery in a region that had seen its share of unexplained disappearances. Throughout April, the investigation continued through more discreet channels. Sheriff Blackwood assigned his deputy, Michael Collins, to keep watch on Edmund Pennington's activities. Collins reported that Pennington had begun spending more time at his mines, often remaining there late into the evening. On several occasions, Pennington was observed entering the North Mine with a small group of men who were not regular employees. When questioned about these individuals, mine foreman Thomas Kelly claimed they were specialists brought in to assess a potential new seam of coal. However, no official records of any new mining initiatives were filed with the county. In his report dated April 23, 1907, Deputy Collins wrote, "Observed E. Pennington and 3 unknown men entering North Mine at approx. 9:30 p.m. They carried what appeared to be surveying equipment and several crates of supplies. They emerged at 1:45 a.m. without the crates. When they departed, Pennington seemed agitated, repeatedly looking over his shoulder as if concerned about being followed. By May, mentions of Martha in the Millbrook Gazette had dwindled to occasional updates that essentially reported no progress. The community began to move on, though Martha's disappearance remained a topic of hushed conversation. Rumors circulated. Some suggested she had run away with a secret lover. Others whispered that she had been sent away due to some scandalous behavior or condition. A few even suggested that Martha had taken her own life, though no one could point to any evidence of suicidal tendencies. Edmund Pennington continued his business activities but became increasingly reclusive. He declined invitations to social events and was rarely seen in town, except on necessary business. Sarah Connor reported that he had instructed her to leave Martha's room untouched, as she may return at any time. Yet he made no further efforts to pursue the investigation or to maintain the reward offer in the public eye. Then came the first truly bizarre development. On June 23, 1907, more than 3 months after Martha vanished, Sarah Connor reported something unusual to Sheriff Blackwood. While cleaning Martha's room, which had been left untouched since her disappearance, Sarah found a handwritten note tucked beneath the mattress. The note, written in what appeared to be Martha's handwriting, contained just 5 words. "He knows about the cellar." Sarah was adamant that the note had not been there during her previous cleanings. "I change the sheets every Tuesday, without fail," she told the sheriff. "That note was not there last week, nor any week before. Someone has placed it there since my last visit." This discovery reignited the investigation. The cellar of the Pennington house was thoroughly searched again, but nothing unusual was found. It was a typical root cellar, used for storing preserved foods and wine. Edmund Pennington insisted that there was nothing unusual about the space and suggested that the note might be a fragment of one of Martha's stories, as she occasionally wrote fiction for her own amusement. Martha was fond of crafting little mystery tales, Pennington told the sheriff. She would often leave notes or clues around the house for her own entertainment. This is likely nothing more than one such flight of fancy, forgotten until now. When questioned about whether Martha had access to any other cellars or basement spaces, Edmund became notably defensive. According to the sheriff's notes, he responded with uncharacteristic anger and insisted that the matter of the note be dropped entirely. This reaction prompted Sheriff Blackwood to conduct a more thorough investigation of the Pennington property records. He discovered that the house, built in 1878, had originally been designed with 2 cellar areas, but the plan submitted for county records in 1882, after a renovation, showed only 1. When confronted with this discrepancy, Edmund claimed that the second cellar had been filled in due to water seepage issues. The original cellar extended beneath the entire east wing, Pennington explained, but the location proved problematic. During heavy rains, the space would flood, causing damage to the foundation. My father decided to seal off that section entirely, filling it with earth and stone to stabilize the structure. The explanation seemed reasonable, but Sheriff Blackwood remained suspicious. He arranged for a structural engineer from Charleston to examine the house plans and the visible cellar space. The engineer, William Harrison, confirmed that the dimensions of the current cellar matched only about half of what was shown on the original plans. However, he could find no obvious evidence of the sealed area from within the existing cellar, no bricked-up doorways or obvious partition walls. If there was indeed a second cellar section, Harrison reported, access to it must have been entirely removed or concealed during the renovation. From within the current cellar, there is no indication of any adjoining space. Throughout the summer of 1907, the case remained at an impasse. Edmund Pennington eventually returned to his business affairs, though he maintained the reward offer. Life in Millbrook continued, and Martha Pennington's disappearance began to fade from daily conversation into the realm of local legend. What happened next comes to us through a series of letters written by Thomas Bennett, a geology student from the University of Pennsylvania who came to Elkhorn County in August 1907 to study the region's coal formations. Bennett was boarding at the home of Harold Jenkins, the postmaster, and naturally heard about the Pennington case. Bennett's first letter to his professor, dated August 15th, mentioned the case briefly. The town is full of whispered stories about a woman who vanished without trace some months ago, the daughter of the local mine owner, apparently. There seems to be some reluctance to discuss the matter openly, which naturally piques my curiosity. The geological aspects of this region are fascinating enough, but I find myself equally intrigued by the strange undercurrents in the community. Bennett's scientific curiosity led him to explore the area around the Pennington property, which was situated near an interesting geological formation. In a letter to his professor dated September 3, 1907, Bennett described discovering something unusual. While examining the hillside behind the Pennington house, I observed what appears to be a small opening in the rock face, partially obscured by vegetation. Local mining records make no mention of any shaft in this location, yet it bears the hallmarks of human modification. The entrance is approximately 3 feet in height and 2 feet in width, reinforced with timber supports that appear to be several decades old. The location is curious, being neither part of the documented Pennington mining operations nor positioned in a manner consistent with early prospecting techniques. Bennett went on to speculate, "I wonder if this might be an earlier exploratory shaft, perhaps dating to the initial coal discoveries in the region. If so, it predates the official surveys and may not appear in any records. Alternatively, it could be connected to the local legends of bootleggers using the hills for concealing their operations during the temperance movements of the 1880s. Whatever its origin, I intend to explore it further, as its position relative to the local strata may provide insights into the geological history of the area." Bennett's subsequent letters detail his exploration of what he determined to be an old mining tunnel, likely dating back to the 1870s when prospectors first came to the area. The tunnel extended approximately 50 yards into the hillside before branching in 2 directions. The left branch ended in a collapse after only a few yards. The right continued further. In a letter dated September 8th, Bennett noted something strange. "The main shaft shows evidence of recent activity, though the entrance appeared long abandoned. Further inside, I found footprints in the dust that cannot be more than a few months old. Some areas have been cleared of debris, and I discovered a lantern that looks relatively new, certainly not an artifact from the original mining operations. Someone has been using this tunnel, and recently." Bennett also observed something that caught his attention as a geology student. The collapse that blocks the left branch of the tunnel does not appear to be natural. The pattern of fallen rock suggests deliberate demolition rather than structural failure. I am increasingly convinced that these tunnels may connect to the old section of the Pennington mine, despite Mr. Pennington's insistence to the local authorities that all such connections were sealed decades ago. Bennett's next letter, dated September 10th, described his discovery of a small chamber off the main tunnel. "Today, I ventured further along the right branch and discovered a space that has been deliberately enlarged and reinforced. The chamber is approximately 10 feet square, with wooden supports and a plank floor laid over the uneven ground. What makes this discovery particularly interesting is the evidence that someone has used this space recently, perhaps within the past 6 months. I found a wooden crate containing supplies, canned food, candles, a blanket, and, most curiously, several books. One appears to be a personal journal, though water damage has rendered much of the content illegible. What little I could decipher suggests that someone was hiding here, possibly against their will. One partially legible passage reads, "Cannot risk, watching always, must find way to, before he returns." The handwriting is delicate, suggesting a woman's hand. What Bennett found at the end of that right branch was described in his final letter dated September 12, 1907. "I have made a discovery of the most disturbing nature which I hesitate to commit to paper. Suffice to say that I believe it may have bearing on the disappearance of the Pennington woman. I will consult with Sheriff Blackwood tomorrow before proceeding further. The letter continued with a cryptic observation. There are markings on the wall of the furthest chamber, recent markings, a woman's name scratched into the rock, and dates, multiple dates, the latest being March 13, 1907, one day after Martha Pennington was reported missing. I have taken rubbings of these markings and will present them to the authorities. There is also a small opening that appears to lead toward the Pennington property. It is too narrow for me to explore fully, but I am certain it connects to the house itself. Bennett ended his letter with a disturbing postscript. I feel I am being watched. Twice now I have returned to my boarding house to find my belongings subtly disturbed, papers rearranged, my field journal moved from its place. Yesterday I distinctly heard footsteps behind me as I returned from the hillside, yet when I turned, no one was there. Mr. Jenkins assures me that Millbrook is a safe community, but there is something in his manner that rings false. He seems nervous whenever I mention my explorations, and yesterday he suggested rather forcefully that I might find better geological specimens in the next county. I cannot shake the feeling that my inquiries are unwelcome. Bennett never met with the sheriff. On September 13th, he failed to return to his boarding house. A search was organized, but no trace of him was ever found. His disappearance was attributed to an accident in the mines or hills, common enough in those days. The connection to the Pennington case was not made by authorities at the time. Harold Jenkins later reported that Bennett had seemed anxious in the days before his disappearance. He had asked questions about Edmund Pennington, not just about his daughter's disappearance, but about his business dealings and associates. Jenkins recalled Bennett saying, "There's something not right about that man. The way people in town speak of him, it's more than respect. It's fear." Jenkins also mentioned that Bennett had been particularly interested in the letter delivered to Martha Pennington shortly before her disappearance. "He kept pressing me about who sent it, what it might have contained," Jenkins told investigators. "I told him I couldn't recall, which was true enough. We deliver many letters each day." Yet in a statement given years later, Jenkins would admit that he had lied about the letter. It came from Pittsburgh, he confessed in 1929, when the case was briefly reopened. The return address was for a law firm, Hargrove & Sons. I remember because Mr. Pennington had specifically instructed me to alert him if any correspondence arrived from Pittsburgh addresses. When I mentioned the letter to him that same day, he seemed disturbed. He asked if Martha had opened it in my presence, and when I said she had not, he nodded and said, "Good, very good." The tunnel Bennett had been exploring was located and searched, but investigators found only an unremarkable mining shaft that ended in a rockfall. There was no sign of Bennett, and no evidence relating to Martha Pennington. The case, once again, went cold. What the official reports failed to mention, however, was a detail provided years later by Deputy Michael Collins, who had been present during the tunnel search. In a statement recorded in 1935, Collins recalled, "The tunnel didn't look the same as Bennett had described it. The right branch that supposedly continued deeper was now blocked by a cave-in that looked fresh." Sheriff Blackwood noted this discrepancy, but decided not to include it in the official report. Later, he told me privately that he suspected someone had deliberately collapsed that section of the tunnel after Bennett's disappearance. When I asked why we weren't investigating further, he just said, "Some stones are better left unturned in this county, especially when they might fall on those doing the turning." Collins also revealed something that had never been officially documented. During our search of the tunnel, I found something caught between two rocks near the fresh cave-in, a piece of fabric that appeared to have been torn from a garment. It was a scrap of blue cotton with a distinctive white embroidered pattern. I recognized it immediately because I had seen Martha Pennington wearing a shirtwaist with that exact pattern at the Founders' Day celebration the previous year. I showed it to Sheriff Blackwood, who examined it briefly, then pocketed it without comment. It never appeared in any of the official evidence. Edmund Pennington sold his mining operations in 1908 and moved to Richmond, Virginia. The house remained in his possession, but stood empty. He never returned to Millbrook. During this period, Rumors circulated about Pennington's sudden departure. Some suggested that his business had suffered due to the scandal surrounding his daughter's disappearance. Others whispered that he had received threatening letters. The manager of the Millbrook Bank, Elias Harwood, later claimed that Pennington had withdrawn almost all his funds just before leaving, converting much of his wealth to bearer bonds that couldn't be traced. He came in one afternoon in late October, just before closing, Harwood recalled in a statement given in 1926. He was agitated, kept looking over his shoulder as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. He withdrew everything except the minimum needed to keep his accounts open and asked for it in the form of bearer bonds and gold certificates. When I expressed surprise at the unusual request, he leaned across my desk and said, "Some questions are best left unasked, Elias, for your own safety." I never saw him in Millbrook again. For nearly 20 years, the case of Martha Pennington existed only as a local mystery, occasionally mentioned but largely forgotten. Then, in 1926, renovations to the county courthouse uncovered a set of documents that had been misfiled and forgotten. Among them was an envelope containing photographs from the Pennington investigation that had never been properly examined. Most were unremarkable. Images of the house, the surrounding property, Martha's room. But one photograph taken of the cellar during the initial investigation captured something that had been overlooked. In the corner of the frame, partially obscured by shadows, was what appeared to be a section of wall with different coloration than the rest, suggesting recent masonry work. The county clerk who discovered the photographs, Lawrence Wilson, was familiar with the Pennington case from local folklore. Intrigued by the anomaly in the cellar photograph, he brought it to the attention of the current sheriff, Robert Hayes. "I might be seeing things that aren't there," Wilson wrote in his accompanying note, "but this section of wall looks different from the rest, newer somehow. Given the rumors about Martha Pennington and the cellar, I thought it might be worth another look." This discovery prompted a brief revival of interest in the case. Sheriff Hayes obtained permission to examine the now abandoned Pennington house. When his team investigated the cellar, they found that the section of wall visible in the photograph had indeed been modified at some point. Upon closer examination, they determined that an opening had been created and then sealed up again with newer bricks and mortar. The local newspaper reported on this development with the headline, "New Evidence in Pennington Mystery. Secret Room Found in Abandoned House." The article noted that Sheriff Hayes believes this discovery may shed light on one of Millbrook's most enduring mysteries. The hidden chamber suggests deception on the part of Edmund Pennington, who consistently denied knowledge of any unusual features in his home. With the property owner's permission, the section of wall was removed. Behind it, they discovered a narrow passage that led to a small room approximately 8 feet square. The room was empty save for a few items, a kerosene lamp, a wool blanket, and, most disturbingly, a leather-bound journal. The journal belonged to Martha Pennington. The entries began in January 1907 and continued until March 11th, the day before she was reported missing. The contents of the journal painted a disturbing picture. In entries from January, Martha wrote of discovering Father's secret, though she never explicitly stated what this secret was. She described overhearing conversations between her father and unknown visitors late at night, and finding unusual financial records that suggested Edmund Pennington's wealth came from sources beyond his legitimate mining operations. January 17, 1907, she wrote, "Father held another of his meetings tonight. 4 men arrived after midnight. I recognized Mr. Harwood from the bank, but the others were strangers, rough-looking men with hard eyes. They spoke in hushed tones, but I could hear fragments about shipments and border crossings. Father became angry when one man mentioned concerns about witnesses. When they left 3 hours later, Father remained in his study, drinking heavily. Martha's journal revealed a pattern of suspicious behavior that had been ongoing for at least a year. She described how her father would often leave the house late at night, ostensibly to check on mining operations, but would return with mud on his clothes that didn't match the soil near the main mine entrances. She noted strange deliveries arriving under cover of darkness, crates that were quickly moved to unknown locations. February 7, 1907. I followed Father tonight, keeping my distance. He went not to the mine office, as he claimed, but to the old north entrance that was supposedly closed years ago. He met with two men I didn't recognize. They unloaded several heavy crates from a wagon and carried them into the tunnel. Father looked nervous, constantly scanning the area around them. I hid behind the large oak tree until they went inside, then crept closer. I could hear them speaking, but the words were indistinct. When they emerged an hour later, the crates were gone. What are they hiding in those abandoned tunnels? More concerning were Martha's descriptions of her deteriorating relationship with her father. He watches me constantly, she wrote on January 24th. His eyes follow me through the house. I fear he suspects that I know. By February, her entries became increasingly paranoid. She described hiding important documents where he won't think to look and making plans to leave Millbrook. I cannot stay, she wrote on February 20th. What I have learned makes it impossible to remain under this roof. A particularly troubling entry from February 23rd read, "Today I found the ledger hidden beneath the floorboards in Father's study. The amounts are staggering, far more money than the mines could possibly generate, and the names, politicians, judges, even law enforcement officials from 3 counties, all receiving regular payments. This explains so much about Father's influence, how problems simply disappear for him." Martha went on to describe how she had copied certain pages from the ledger and hidden them, though she did not specify where. "These will be my insurance," she wrote. "If anything happens to me, the truth will still find its way to light." On February 27th, the date of her last regular diary entry, she wrote, "Father received a telegram today that caused him great distress. He spent hours in his study afterward, burning papers. I could smell the smoke from my room. Later, I overheard him speaking with someone on the telephone, a rare occurrence, as he usually conducts his business in person. It must be taken care of immediately," he said. "We cannot afford another incident like Pittsburgh." When he emerged from his study, he looked at me strangely, as if seeing me for the first time. "You look unwell, Martha," he said. "Perhaps you should retire early tonight." His concern felt hollow, a performance for an audience of 1. The sounds have returned. Father says it's nothing but the house settling. After this entry, there was a gap of nearly 2 weeks before the final entries. When the journal resumed on March 10th, Martha's handwriting had changed, becoming more hurried, less controlled. March 10th, 1907. A letter arrived today from Mr. Hargrove in Pittsburgh. Father wasn't here to intercept it. The contents confirm my worst suspicions. Father's business interests extend far beyond coal mining. The merchandise they've been moving through the old mine tunnels, it's not legal goods. And the accidents at the Westbrook and Sullivan mines weren't accidents at all. They were deliberate, designed to eliminate competition. People died so Father could increase his profits. I feel ill thinking about it. How long has this been happening? What else has he done? The final entries detailed Martha's discovery of the hidden room behind the cellar wall. According to her journal, she had followed her father one night and observed him entering the cellar and then seemingly disappearing. After he left the house the next day, she investigated and found the concealed passage. March 5, 1907. I found it today, the room behind the false wall. Father has created a hiding place, or perhaps an escape route. The passage continues beyond the small room. I can feel cold air coming from somewhere deeper inside. I didn't dare explore further without proper light. What is he preparing for? Who is he hiding from? Or is this where he plans to hide me if I threaten to expose him? 2 days later, she wrote, March 7, I explored the tunnel behind the hidden room today. It extends for about 50 yards before connecting to what appears to be an old mining passage. The tunnel branches in 2 directions from there. I followed the right branch as far as I dared, It seems to lead toward the north mine entrance. Is this how Father has been moving goods without being seen? Using tunnels beneath our own property? I've marked the walls at intervals so I won't become lost. I need to explore further, but not today. I felt as though someone was watching me, though I saw no one. Martha's last entry, dated March 11, 1907, read, "I have prepared everything. Tomorrow, when Father leaves for his meeting in town, I will take the documents and go to Sheriff Blackwood. This has to end. I hear him moving around downstairs now. The hour is late. I should be asleep. I pray he doesn't suspect." The final words, written in a noticeably shakier hand, were, "The cellar door just opened. I hear footsteps on the stairs. Someone is coming up, but Father is supposed to be in Pittsburgh, unless—" The entry ended there. The discovery of the journal prompted a more thorough investigation of Edmund Pennington's affairs. County records revealed that in 1906, 1907, several of Pennington's business competitors had experienced mysterious accidents or sudden financial ruin. The Westbrook mine had flooded in December 1906, resulting in the deaths of 3 miners and forcing the operation to close permanently. The Sullivan Mining Company had suffered a devastating explosion in February 1907 that killed 12 men and led to the company's bankruptcy. In both cases, investigations had ruled the incidents as unfortunate accidents, but Martha's journal cast these conclusions in a sinister, new light. Sheriff Hayes pursued these leads, reviewing old case files and interviewing former employees of Pennington's mining operations. Several reported unusual shipments arriving at night, crates that were handled only by trusted men and stored in a separate building that most workers were forbidden to enter. One former night watchman, speaking on condition of anonymity, claimed that he had once glimpsed the contents of one such crate. Weapons, he said, the likes of which I'd never seen before. Military grade. Not the sort of thing any civilian should have. The investigation also uncovered evidence that Pennington had maintained a network of informants throughout the county, including people within law enforcement. This might explain why certain aspects of the original investigation had been overlooked or deliberately misdirected. Several witnesses who had previously been reluctant to speak now came forward with information about Pennington's more questionable activities. He wasn't just a businessman, one former mine supervisor told Sheriff Hayes. He was more like a ruler of his own little kingdom. Nothing happened in this county without his knowledge or approval. People who crossed him had a way of encountering misfortune, losing their jobs, having accidents, or simply deciding to move away suddenly. We all knew better than to ask too many questions or talk about what we saw. Edmund Pennington himself could not be questioned. He had died in 1921 in Richmond, reportedly, of heart failure. However, authorities did manage to locate Sarah Connor, the housekeeper, now elderly and living with her daughter in Charleston. When interviewed, Sarah revealed something she had kept secret for decades. On the morning she discovered Martha missing, she had also noticed fresh mud on Edmund Pennington's boots by the back door, despite the fact that he was supposedly in Pittsburgh at the time. Fear of Pennington's influence had kept her silent. He was a powerful man, she told Sheriff Hayes, and not just because of his money. People who crossed Edmund Pennington had a way of encountering misfortune. I had my own family to think about. Sarah also described finding something else on the day of Martha's disappearance, something she had never told anyone. While looking for Martha, she had noticed that the rug in Edmund's study was slightly askew. When she adjusted it, she discovered a small smear of what looked like blood on the floorboard beneath. She had quickly replaced the rug, terrified of what the discovery might mean. "I've carried that guilt all these years," she admitted. "Maybe if I'd spoken up, they would have found her, or at least known what happened to her." The most disturbing revelation came when Sarah described the relationship between Martha and her father in the weeks before her disappearance. There was a tension between them, something beyond the usual father-daughter disagreements. Martha seemed afraid, though she tried to hide it. And Mr. Pennington, he watched her. Not like a father concerned for his daughter, but like a man watching a threat he needed to contain. Sarah also recalled an incident just 3 days before Martha's disappearance. I arrived early that day and heard them arguing in his study. Martha's voice was raised, something I'd never heard before. She was saying something about blood money and people who died. Mr. Pennington shouted back that she didn't understand how the world worked and that sometimes sacrifices were necessary. When they realized I was in the house, they both fell silent. Martha emerged from the study with her face flushed and eyes brimming with tears. Mr. Pennington followed a moment later, composed as ever, and told me that Martha wasn't feeling well and to prepare some tea for her. The look he gave her as she climbed the stairs, I'll never forget it. There was something cold there, calculating. Based on these new discoveries, Sheriff Hayes ordered an excavation of the area beneath the study where the blood had been found. The floorboards were removed, revealing nothing unusual in the soil beneath. However, a more thorough search of the hidden cellar room uncovered something that had been missed in 1926, a small door, cunningly disguised as part of the stone foundation, that opened into a narrow tunnel. The tunnel extended approximately 30 yards before connecting with a larger passage that appeared to be part of the old mining system, likely the same tunnel that Thomas Bennett had been exploring when he disappeared. The connection between the house and the mines had been deliberately concealed, creating a secret exit from the Pennington property. The mining engineer who assisted with the exploration, James Wilson, noted, "This connection couldn't have been accidental. Considerable effort went into creating a stable, navigable passage between the house and the mining tunnels. The work was professional, support beams, proper ventilation, even small drainage channels to prevent water accumulation. This wasn't some haphazard excavation. It was a deliberate infrastructure project that would have taken weeks, if not months, to complete. And it would have required the knowledge and approval of whoever owned both the house and the mining rights." Further exploration of this tunnel system revealed a larger chamber that showed signs of habitation, the remains of a cot, some canned goods, and a kerosene stove. More ominously, investigators found a section of wall where names had been scratched into the stone. Most had been deliberately obscured by chisel marks, but one remained partially legible, Mark P.N. The dates beside this partial name ranged from March 13 to April 2, 1907, suggesting that whoever had scratched them had been in the chamber for at least 3 weeks after Martha's reported disappearance. Near this chamber, they discovered something that sent a chill through even the most hardened investigators, a small alcove that had been walled up with stones. When these stones were removed, they found human remains, not of a woman, as they had expected, but of a man. Dental records later confirmed these to be the remains of Thomas Bennett, the geology student who had disappeared in 1907. Forensic examination suggested that Bennett had died from a severe blow to the back of the head. He had then been sealed into the wall alcove, buried alive, according to the medical examiner, who found evidence that Bennett had still been breathing, though unconscious, when the stonework was completed. The positioning of the body and the pattern of scratches on the inside of the wall suggests that Bennett regained consciousness at some point during his entombment, the medical examiner's report stated. He appears to have made desperate attempts to escape, resulting in extensive damage to his fingernails and fingertips. Death would have come slowly, either from suffocation as the available oxygen was depleted, or from dehydration over a period of several days. Further examination of the chamber yielded additional evidence. Hidden beneath a loose stone in the floor, investigators found a small tin containing several folded pages that appeared to have been torn from a ledger. The pages contained names and amounts, just as Martha had described in her journal, a detailed accounting of bribes paid to officials throughout the region, including the previous sheriff of Elkhorn County, William Blackwood. This discovery cast the original investigation in an entirely new light. If Blackwood had been receiving payments from Edmund Pennington, it explained why certain leads had not been pursued and why key evidence might have been overlooked or suppressed. It also raised the troubling possibility that Blackwood had been complicit in covering up not only Martha's disappearance, but also the subsequent vanishing of Thomas Bennett. The case was never officially solved. No body was ever found that could be identified as Martha Pennington. The discoveries of 1926 and the subsequent investigation in the 1930s led to speculation, but no conclusive evidence of what had happened to her. The hidden room suggested preparation for either hiding someone or being used as a hideout, but its exact purpose remained unclear. In 1937, a woman came forward claiming to be Martha Pennington. Elizabeth Kramer, a resident of Baltimore, stated that she had fled Millbrook in 1907 after discovering her father's criminal connections. She had assumed a new identity and started a new life, too afraid to ever return or reveal herself while her father was alive. Her claim was investigated thoroughly. She did bear a striking resemblance to photographs of Martha, and she knew details about the Pennington house that were not public knowledge. However, certain inconsistencies in her account raised doubts. When asked about the hidden room behind the cellar wall, she claimed no knowledge of it, a detail that, according to Martha's journal, she should have known. The final assessment of investigators was that Elizabeth Kramer was likely an imposter, perhaps someone who had known Martha and was using that connection to claim an inheritance from the Pennington estate, which remained in legal limbo. The claim was eventually dismissed by the courts. Sheriff Hayes, however, remained troubled by the case. In his personal journal, he wrote, "I am not convinced that Mrs. Kramer is an imposter, despite the official finding. Her resemblance to the photographs of Martha Pennington is uncanny, and her knowledge of the family and house is extensive. The inconsistencies in her account might be explained by trauma or by a deliberate attempt to distance herself from the most disturbing aspects of her past. If she is indeed Martha, her reluctance to acknowledge the hidden room might stem from whatever occurred there on the night of March 11, 1907. Some memories are too painful to be admitted, even decades later. The story might have ended there, but for one final, unsettling epilogue. In 1953, the Pennington house, which had changed hands several times but never been occupied for long, was purchased by James and Mary Wilcox. The couple moved in with plans to renovate the old property. They lasted less than 3 months before abandoning the house abruptly, leaving behind most of their possessions. James Wilcox, when later interviewed by a reporter from the Charleston Gazette who was writing a piece on local legends, would say only that they had heard things in the house that could not be explained. When pressed, he added, there were footsteps in the walls, and sometimes, late at night, we could hear a woman's voice whispering from inside the cellar. Always the same words, "He knows." Mary Wilcox provided more details in a separate interview. It wasn't just sounds. Things would be moved when we weren't looking. I would leave a room with everything in its place and return to find objects rearranged. Not dramatically, but enough to notice. A book would be on a different shelf. A vase would be turned slightly. Once I found all the kitchen knives laid out in a perfect circle on the table, though I had put them away in the drawer before going to bed. She also described a recurring nightmare that plagued her during their brief stay. I dreamed of a woman wandering through endless dark tunnels searching for a way out. She would find what seemed to be an exit, only to discover another tunnel beyond it. In the dream, I could feel her growing desperation, her certainty that something was pursuing her through the darkness. I would always wake just as she turned to face whatever was behind her. The reporter, intrigued by Wilcox's account, visited the abandoned house himself. In his article, published October 31, 1954, he described an unsettling experience. I entered the house at midday, when the sun was high and shadows were few. Even so, there was a heaviness to the air inside, a sense of watchful silence that pressed against my ears. In the main hallway, I noticed that several floorboards had been pried up, as if someone had been searching for something beneath them. In the study, where Edmund Pennington once conducted his mysterious business dealings, the plaster on one wall had been partially removed, revealing the lath beneath. Scratched into one of the wooden strips was a series of numbers, perhaps a date. 3/12/07. The reporter continued his exploration, eventually making his way to the cellar. The entrance to the hidden room has been sealed up again, though it's clear from the newer bricks that this was done recently, perhaps by the Wilcoxes during their brief residence. As I stood examining this wall, a cold draft seemed to emerge from between the bricks, carrying with it a sound that I first attributed to the wind outside. But as I listened more carefully, I became convinced that it was a human sound, a whisper, so faint that I could not make out the words. I placed my ear against the wall and waited. Minutes passed. Then, just as I was about to give up, I heard it clearly, a woman's voice saying 3 simple words, "Find the ledger." The Pennington house still stands today, though it has fallen into disrepair. Locals avoid it, especially after dark. Some claim to have heard sounds coming from within, footsteps, whispers, the sound of someone scratching at the walls. In 1962, a historical society attempted to document the case but found that many of the records had mysteriously disappeared from the county archives. The journal discovered in 1926 was among the missing items. The photographs remained, however, including one taken of the hidden room that had never been published. In the bottom corner of that photograph, barely visible in the shadows, is what appears to be a set of initials scratched into the brick wall, MP, and beside them a date, March 12, 1907, the very day Martha Pennington was reported missing. Another curious development occurred in 1965 when renovations to the old Millbrook Bank building uncovered a metal box that had been sealed inside a wall. The box contained a ledger, similar to the one described in Martha's journal, with detailed records of payments to various officials throughout the region. Many of the names were prominent figures from the early 1900s. The ledger was quickly confiscated by federal authorities, and its contents were never made public. The Millbrook Gazette reported on the discovery with the headline, "Hidden Documents Found in Bank Wall, Possible Connection to Pennington Case." The article noted that authorities declined to comment on the nature of the documents, citing an ongoing investigation. However, sources close to the matter suggest that the contents may shed new light on one of the county's most enduring mysteries. In that same year, an elderly man named Joseph Harwood, the son of Elias Harwood, who had been the bank manager during Pennington's time, made a deathbed confession to his priest. According to the priest's later testimony, given with the family's permission, Harwood revealed that his father had been deeply involved in Edmund Pennington's criminal enterprises, which included gun running, bribery, and possibly worse. "My father was not merely Pennington's banker," Harwood reportedly said. "He was his partner in all things. They moved weapons through the mines, selling to both sides in labor disputes, to criminal organizations in the cities, even to foreign buyers. The money was enormous, but so was the risk. When anyone threatened their operation, they were dealt with permanently." The most disturbing part of the confession concerned Martha Pennington. Harwood claimed that his father had told him that Martha had indeed discovered evidence of her father's illegal activities and had threatened to expose him. Edmund, realizing that his daughter could not be bribed or intimidated into silence, had made arrangements for her to disappear. According to Harwood's account, Martha had not been killed outright. Instead, she had been drugged and taken through the tunnel system to an abandoned section of mine several miles away. There she had been held prisoner in a makeshift cell, the intention being to keep her there until certain sensitive business matters were concluded, after which she would be released far from West Virginia with a new identity and enough money to start a new life, provided she never returned. But something had gone wrong. The man assigned to guard Martha had reported that she had escaped her cell and fled deeper into the mine tunnels. A search had been organized, but in the maze of old mining passages, she was never found. Whether she had found another exit and escaped, or become lost and perished in the darkness, no one knew. This account, while compelling, could not be verified. Joseph Harwood died shortly after his confession, and no corroborating evidence was ever found. The priest who heard the confession suggested that it might have been the product of a guilty conscience and an old man's feverish imagination, rather than actual knowledge of events. The question remains, what happened to Martha Pennington? Did she flee her father's house, taking with her whatever secrets she had uncovered? Was she the victim of foul play, silenced to protect those secrets? Or is there another explanation, one that lies somewhere in the strange, liminal space between known facts and folk legend? The few remaining records tell us that Thomas Bennett, the geology student who disappeared while investigating the tunnel behind the Pennington property, had made one other notable discovery before he vanished. In his field notebook found among his possessions at his boarding house, he had sketched a rough map of the tunnel system. In his notes, he observed that one branch of the tunnel appeared to extend directly toward the foundation of the Pennington house. Another branch led to what he described as a natural cavern of considerable size, with evidence of long-term human habitation. Most intriguingly, Bennett had noted finding a woman's glove, relatively new in this cavern, along with tins of food, a water canteen, and what appears to be a makeshift bed. He had concluded his notes with a question, is someone living down here? And if so, who? Bennett's final entry, dated the day of his disappearance, contained a disturbing observation. Return to the cavern today. The supplies have been moved and fresh footprints mark the floor. Someone has been here since yesterday. I waited for nearly 3 hours, hoping they might return, but saw no one. Just as I was preparing to leave, I heard something. A woman's voice, distant but clear, calling for help. I followed the sound deeper into the tunnel system, but could find no one. The acoustics in these passages are strange. Sounds echo and distort in unpredictable ways. Yet I cannot shake the feeling that someone is down here, lost in this underground labyrinth, desperately seeking a way out. In 1968, the last official investigation into the case was closed. The file was sealed and archived, deemed to be of historical interest only. Yet even today, residents of Millbrook occasionally report unusual phenomena near the old Pennington property. Unexplained lights, the sound of a woman's voice carried on the night air, the sense of being watched from the darkened windows of the abandoned house. One local legend, passed down through generations, tells of a pale woman sometimes glimpsed at the edge of the woods near the old mine entrances. According to the story, she appears only at dusk, standing motionless among the trees, watching the road that leads to what was once the Pennington property. Those who claim to have seen her describe her as wearing clothing from another era, a long skirt and high-neck blouse typical of the early 1900s. She never approaches or speaks, and if anyone tries to get closer, she retreats into the trees and vanishes. Some believe this apparition to be the ghost of Martha Pennington, still trying to find her way home. Others suggest a more mundane explanation, that Martha did escape the mines and lived for years as a recluse in the surrounding hills, occasionally venturing close to her former home, but too traumatized or afraid to ever fully return to society. According to this theory, sightings of the Millbrook Watcher, as the figure came to be known, continued until approximately the 1940s, when they gradually ceased, perhaps coinciding with the natural end of what would have been Martha's lifespan. In 1967, an article in a paranormal investigation magazine brought renewed attention to the case. The author, Reginald Stevens, spent 3 nights in the abandoned Pennington house and claimed to have recorded electronic voice phenomena on his audio equipment. Among the sounds he captured was what he described as a woman's voice, barely above a whisper, repeating the same phrases over and over. In the walls, find the ledger, and most frequently, he's coming back. Stevens's investigation also uncovered something that had been overlooked by previous researchers, a small compartment hidden beneath the floorboards of Martha's bedroom. Inside, he found a metal tin containing several folded pages that appeared to have been torn from a ledger. The pages contained names and amounts, just as Martha had described in her journal. Stevens turned these pages over to the County Historical Society, but they disappeared from the Society's archives within a week, and no copies were ever made public. The historian who received the documents, Dr. Eleanor Hayes, later claimed that she had been approached by two men claiming to be federal agents who demanded the papers. They were most insistent, she recalled in an interview given in 1975. They claimed the documents were related to an ongoing investigation involving national security matters. When I expressed skepticism, they became quite threatening. One of them mentioned my grandchildren by name and asked if I knew where they walked to school each day. I handed over the papers immediately. Perhaps some secrets are destined to remain buried in the shadows of the past. Perhaps some truths are too disturbing to be fully uncovered. But for those who know the story of Martha Pennington, the old house on the edge of town stands as a silent monument to a mystery that has never been truly laid to rest. In 1993, during an unusually rainy spring, a section of hillside collapsed near one of the old mine entrances, revealing a previously unknown tunnel. Inside, survey teams found an old leather satchel containing what appeared to be personal effects, a silver hairbrush, a tarnished hand mirror, and several books, their pages long since ruined by moisture. Among these items was a small diary, most of its contents illegible, but with a name still visible on the inside cover, property of Martha Pennington. The discovery sparked a brief revival of interest in the case, but no further evidence emerged. The satchel and its contents were placed in the county museum, where they remain today, tangible links to a woman who vanished over a century ago, leaving behind only questions and whispers. While most of the writing has been rendered unreadable by water damage, a few phrases can still be made out. Deeper than I thought, found another way, and most intriguingly, must keep moving. These fragments suggest that Martha may have survived in the tunnel system for some time after her initial disappearance. And if you find yourself driving through the hills of Elkhorn County, past an abandoned white two-story house with boarded windows and an overgrown yard, you might want to keep driving. Curator of the museum, Margaret Wilson, noted something curious about the diary found in the collapsed tunnel. The final legible entry is dated April 17, 1907, more than a month after Martha supposedly disappeared. Don't stop to explore. Don't venture near the cellar entrance, now half collapsed but still visible, at the side of the house. And whatever you do, don't listen too closely if you think you hear a woman's voice, whispering from somewhere deep within the walls, still trying, after all these years, to tell someone what she found. The locals who grew up with the legend of Martha Pennington have their own warnings. Never go near that place after dark, they'll tell you. And if you hear a woman calling your name from inside the house, don't answer. Don't even turn around. Just walk away as quickly as you can. According to one elderly resident who declined to be named, that house has been drawing people in for over 100 years. Some say it's Martha trying to find someone to tell her story. Others think it's something else, something that was there before the Penningtons, before the mines, maybe even before the town itself. All I know is that people who spend too much time around that place start to change. They get quieter. They start listening for things the rest of us can't hear. In 2002, a group of paranormal investigators attempted to spend the night in the house as part of a documentary project. They set up cameras and audio equipment throughout the building, focusing particularly on the cellar area and the sealed entrance to the hidden room. The footage they captured showed little of interest until approximately 3:17 a.m., when all of their equipment suddenly failed simultaneously. When the systems came back online 20 minutes later, one of the team members was missing. The remaining investigators searched the house and surrounding property, but found no trace of their colleague. Local authorities were called, and a more thorough search was conducted, but the missing person was never found. The documentary was never completed, and the raw footage was confiscated as part of the investigation. It has never been made public, The official explanation was that the missing investigator had simply left the project without informing the others, though this account was vehemently disputed by the rest of the team. One member later claimed in an online forum that their missing colleague had been acting strangely in the hours before the equipment failure, repeatedly claiming to hear a woman's voice coming from inside the walls, asking for help. The leader of the paranormal investigation team, Dr. James Collins, gave a statement to local authorities that was largely disregarded at the time. "What happened in that house defies conventional explanation. Our equipment was state-of-the-art, designed to function under extreme conditions. The simultaneous failure of multiple independent systems is, statistically speaking, nearly impossible." More troubling was the behavior of our missing team member in the hours leading up to his disappearance. He became increasingly agitated, claiming that he could hear voices coming from the walls, specifically a woman begging for help. He also reported feeling a presence watching him from the hidden room in the cellar, despite the fact that the entrance remained sealed. Just before our equipment failed, he told me he was going to try to communicate with whatever was in the house. Those were the last words he spoke to any of us. The current owner of the property, a real estate development company that acquired it in a tax sale in 2010, has made several attempts to renovate the house for commercial purposes. Each attempt has been abandoned due to what the company describes as structural issues. Workers have reported unusual occurrences, tools that disappear only to be found in different locations, unexplained cold spots, and the persistent sound of scratching coming from inside the walls. One construction foreman who quit after just 3 days on the project told the local newspaper that house doesn't want to be fixed. Sounds crazy, I know, but that's the feeling you get when you're in there. Like the place itself is fighting against any changes. We'd put up new drywall and the next morning it would be cracked. We'd repair floorboards and they'd be pulled up again overnight. And always, always that scratching sound in the walls, like someone's trying to get out. In 2015, a historical preservationist conducting an assessment of the property made a disturbing discovery. While examining the attic space, she found a small compartment hidden beneath the eaves. Inside was a sealed mason jar containing a folded piece of paper. The note, written in faded ink, read simply, "My name is Martha Pennington. If you are reading this, I am likely dead. My father is not what he appears to be. The truth is in the ledger. Look beneath the oak where Mother used to read." Authorities conducted a search of the property, focusing on a large oak tree at the edge of the garden, presumably the one referenced in the note. Ground-penetrating radar revealed an anomaly beneath the tree approximately 3 feet down. Excavation uncovered a metal box containing documents that had largely decomposed due to moisture. Only fragments remained legible, but they appeared to be financial records similar to those described in Martha's journal. The case of Martha Pennington remains officially unsolved. The truth of what happened on that March night in 1907 lies buried in the past, accessible now only through fragments of evidence, contradictory accounts, and the persistent whispers of local legend. Some in Millbrook believe that Martha escaped her father's house and fled the area entirely, perhaps assuming a new identity and building a new life far from the shadows of her past. Others are convinced that she met a darker fate in the tunnels beneath the Pennington property, her remains still hidden in some collapsed passage or sealed chamber, and a few suggest that Martha never left at all, that she remains in the house in some form, still trying to reveal the truth about what happened there over a century ago. The house itself stands as a monument to the mystery, decaying but persistent, much like the questions surrounding Martha's fate. Visitors to the area occasionally stop to photograph the abandoned structure, drawn by its Gothic appearance and the whispered stories of its past. Few venture beyond the overgrown garden, deterred by the no trespassing signs and the house's ominous reputation. Those who do approach more closely often report a sensation of being watched from the darkened windows, a feeling so intense that many turn back before reaching the porch. And on quiet nights, particularly when the wind blows from the east, People driving past sometimes claim to hear a woman's voice carried on the air, not calling out, but whispering, as if sharing a secret that can only be heard by those willing to listen closely. Because in cases like Martha Pennington's, sometimes the most terrifying truth is that some questions are better left unanswered, some doors are better left unopened, and some secrets are better left buried in the dark, forgotten corners of history. The case of Martha Pennington remains officially unsolved.